We have an opening coming up, so let's get the show on the road. Good evening. On behalf of the Friends of the Secession, it's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight. It's really a great luxury to have a talk with the artist right before the opening, because we are grounding ourselves in a conversation, and I think being in a conversation is very much what you're doing. So I don't want to take any time away from our esteemed talkers or partners in conversation, so I'm just going to put some parameters, biographical parameters, and leave the rest up to you. First of all, I would like to introduce Justin Lieberman and Stephanie Weber. Stephanie Weber is a curator at the Lehmbach House. She just recently opened an exhibition which is called Aber hier leben, nein danke. Supposedly it's a song. Surrealism and anti-fascism, and you can see it until the beginning of March. She has worked with Rochelle previously. She has done a show with Rochelle at the Lehmbach House, and so has Justin Lieberman, who's a former student of Rochelle. And he's an artist living in Munich and a teacher. And I uncovered that he actually did a show with Rochelle as early as 2012 called Valley of the Infinite in the New Gallery in Paris. Do you remember that? Barely.
I also did not.
You remember? So he barely remembered it. So Rochelle is a New Yorker. She was born in New York, and she lived in New York all her life, and she is a much respected and beloved figure in the New York art world and way beyond. She has taught, I could say, almost 2 generations of artists. First she started at Bennington College in the 80s. You were still very young then.
Not really.
In the 80s, where she taught until 1994. In 1994, she was one of the first women tenured professor to be called to the art school at Yale. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And she was teaching there until 2017. She was also running the graduate program, and that's a long time, 94 to 17, and now she's Professor Emerita there. I wanted to point out perhaps 2 shows. One she did, and that was, everybody was talking about it, she did simultaneously with her 6 galleries. And it was Bridget Donahue, Candice from New York, Candice Maddy in New York, Nina Johnson in Miami, Hannah Hoffman in Los Angeles, Francesca Pia in Zurich, and Campoli Presti from Paris. So all the galleries together staged the show at the same time. Yeah. And there is a wonderful publication as well, which was published. And what was the title of the show?
You Again.
You Again, right, it makes sense. That makes sense. And of course, her series of exhibitions, solo exhibition, dual exhibition, goes over many pages. And I just want to point out the most recent one in Europe. It was at the Centre d'Art Contemporain in Geneva, and I like the titles very much. In anticipation of Women's History Month, that one, it traveled on, and you changed the title to the Städtische Galerie in Lehmbach Haus with Stephanie Weber, who also published a fantastic catalog, which you can purchase from Walter König if it's not out of print. And then it went to the Kästner Gesellschaft, Make It Believe, and then it went to as a retrospective to the Bronx Museum, where it was her big solo show. And we're trying to follow this rhythm. We are opening the show here, and it will travel to Kunsthaus Glados. From there, it will travel to Aachen, to the Ludwig Forum, and from there, we just found out today, it will travel in an expanded version to the Barnes in Philadelphia. So we're looking forward to all these stations, and I'm handing over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie.
Just, there will not be any Q&A, because I hope you understand, because we have right after this the opening, and the artist is going to be present, and you can engage with her during the opening. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, hello everyone. Full disclosure, we have not just met at the hotel bar. We have known each other for quite a while. And it was actually Rochelle's idea that we would talk with each other, the three of us, and we have related to each other in different constellations throughout our lives, mostly friendship, fandom, admiration, work. And Justin and Rochelle, as was just said, have related to each other as professor and student. Rochelle and I as an artist and a curator. Justin and I as well, artist and curator. We also happen to live in the same apartment. And so we thought maybe this is a pretty good setup to quiz Rochelle a little bit about her work and else. So Justin and Rochelle, 13 years ago, this in 2011, did an interview together in Bomb magazine. And this is something I recently looked back into. And yeah, too loud? Okay, too quiet? Slower. This is very difficult for me with the slow. I'm going to try. So Justin, in this interview, described Rochelle's work as paradoxically political brand of l'art pour l'art. And by this he meant the push and pull in your work, Rochelle, of referencing specific events in the world, in politics, in pop culture, and yet doing so in so abstract a fashion and in dialogue with the history of modernist painting that these references are not so easy to decipher. And I think this is something that is a characteristic of your work, and maybe we can jump into this by talking about the title you chose for this exhibition, Zeit im Bild, the Today Show.
Yes. Am I echoing here? Am I? Okay, I am. Oh, okay. The Today Show. Yes. As Stephanie was, thank you for the introduction, by the way, and thank you, Sylvie, and thank you, everyone who's been part of this project, and to you as well, Justin. So, somehow I'm told I manifested this show. I had a thought about a year ago I had an opportunity to do a booth at an art fair, and I thought, do I want to spend 6 months of my life working on work that's going to be present and seen for 4 days? And I thought that's not a good idea. And so I thought, what do I want to do? And I had this idea that rather than doing one show that was singular in its how it addressed painting and whatever I chose to events, experience, subjective, personal, whatever I chose as a subject for that exhibition, I think I wanted to reflect upon the moment, which has been rather difficult, politically, socially, culturally. And I speak for myself as a citizen. And I thought best spent some time making work that can put perhaps four different elements in one show to create this kind of disruption of narrative, of a painting, of seriality, and to put things together in a way which were maybe not immediately legible, but somehow address some of the concerns I had in currently. So it became the Today Show because I wanted the work to reflect today. And coincidentally, the other edge of that today is the Today Show, which is really, in the States, it's an entertainment, infotainment. It's really not a news show in the morning, and it is here. So there is a difference there, but I thought, well, the Today Show was a very good place to begin. It gave me freedom.
Okay, thank you. And you said today, earlier in the press conference, it was kind of a way of chronicling today. And you also made a series of paintings that are on view here, whose titles relate to grammar and time, and particularly to the present. Mm-hmm. And some of the titles are simple present, present perfect, present continuous. These are times that actually exist. But there's also present conditional and present indicative. And could you maybe speak about this series, both in relation to the present and maybe also about the individual titles?
I'd love to, because I've never studied grammar as a child. I passed that step, so I can't really address the usage of all those tenses at the moment. But I can say that the titles have generally been a part of my work, and sometimes in advance of the work. Sometimes the title or a phrase or a word can kind of stimulate something that I need to understand. And in this case, I began working on these larger paintings specifically for this show. And I had started them, and then I put on a Zoom talk like last August or September, and the subject was the collages of Robert Motherwell and Lee Krasner. And Lee Krasner, if you're familiar with her painting, she had a very lengthy career and a highly respected artist. I would say a pretty great artist. And she had, in 1977, 78, 79, she had studied with Hans Hofmann after he came to America. And she had studied drawing with Hofmann, and she had these newsprint, I don't know what the word is here for this kind of rough paper, just for sketch paper, of drawings that she made with Hans Hofmann. And she pulled them out, and she began cutting them up, which was like literally to cut up her history, or a history. And she then used the same scale, as it turns out, as these paintings, which had already begun. And she created works which she used grammar. She put grammar to use for the titles. They were quite different than these. They were something indicatives. I can't even remember what they were right now. But they were all, I think there were 11 tenses that she had. And I thought, when I heard this and I saw these pieces, which I had never seen before, they're really rare. They don't show often. This group of paintings, which she then collaged her own paintings onto. So she cut up her paintings and then put them with the drawings, and it created a kind of a time mush together of these things, which had a history of art, a history of modernist painting, and it also created something new in terms of how a painting could be constructed. So I thought, I'm working on these paintings, it's about today, so I chose the present tense to create the present in grammar. And there were only 4 tenses that are present tense. You have the list. And so I invented 2. And those are with LK. So I was really, truly inspired by that late practice of hers. And that's it.
Maybe just before we move on to something else, so some of those paintings are over there on the wall, and so as you can see, there are some that are composed of a single canvas, and then there are others that have a little aside. So the buddies.
Oh, the buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to say.
Okay, so maybe we'll get to that. We'll get to
no,
that.
I can in brief. The title. I mean, I call them trauma buddies because that was a phrase. I wanted to make a diptych. That was my intention. And I've worked a lot, as you can see here. I work a lot with different parts that don't exactly match, and so I heard that Brad Pitt and George Clooney refer to each other as trauma buddies, and I didn't know that phrase, and so I looked it up, and it really is. It truly is a thing, and I don't make a joke of it, but I thought rather than call these diptychs. And I call them trauma buddies because it has something to do with the content inside the painting. And so it's a kind of a conflict or a grudge that I have. So they're not exactly buddies, there's trauma involved.
I have something that I wrote. I mean, I have lots of things I was going
I
to
know
ask
you do.
But, okay, but just because you talked about the trauma buddy paintings, when earlier at the press conference, I guess, and you spoke about an engagement with gesture, and you talked about these paintings as duplicating like the wipe off of the brush. You know, that like when you have extra on the brush and you wipe it off before you use it, right? So I was thinking about that, and I thought this is a very different way of talking about gesture than it's often talked about in art, because usually in art you either have the kind of romantic, erratic painting gesture, and it's different than that, but it's also different than the idea of like a conceptual gesture that is defined by its economy and its grace. It's something that's much more quotidian and laborious in a way, and kind of like an invisible gesture. You wouldn't even, like something you do without thinking about it.
Yeah. That captures it. That erratic. I
But is that how you think about it too?
Yeah, because you cover these categories of what gesture could arrange, and within that, arrange within that of what gesture might represent, or just in terms of a practice. And you know, I think in early days of art school, and people are painting, they discuss mark making, for example. And so this is very simple mark making, without intention.
Yeah, a gesture without intention. That is that's quite interesting.
Well, because I don't think that it's my, it's how I guess I differentiate, because I'm not a gestural painter. I should clarify that, because for those of you, obviously many of you don't know my work. I generally work with a grid, and kind of in principle, not maybe an apparent one, but it's already inherent after all these years. So the gesture is something that I've never really explored before. And in this case, I think that today, there is a proliferation of gestural painting. And in a way that hasn't been around, I think, since the, I would say, 50s, and lyrical abstraction. There's been a number of smaller movements towards it that are more illusory. They kind of create a kind of atmosphere for paint. And I wanted to extract that idea of the emotive from the mark and reproduce it again and again and again. So all these, all the muslins that are here that are printed come from 11 silk screens, and they come from composition papers. You can see the holes when you look. And the papers, I just wipe a brush off, ink, and then they're scanned. Is this good information?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're scanned. It's technical, but it's a little layered. Scanned, they're scanned, digitized. Then they're blown up in scale. And so we keep doing all these repeated silk screens in color and over and over and over. So that hence they're removed. These gestures are flattened out, removed. And the composition paper is just my little, thing. Because it's a basic composition. I mean, in art we have composition, which is a real important thing. I'm a very form-oriented person. So in my work, not in my life necessarily, but so that this kind of gestural gesture is more of what I've done to kind of gesture towards it rather than use it. There's no surface on the gesture; it's flat.
Yeah.
There's no kind of painterly viscosity, no materiality. It's really all flattened out, which is how. I mean, it's just a very difficult moment. So, yeah.
How do you mean that? It's a difficult moment.
I think that well, maybe I don't think it's personal. I think in general, the kind of conditions existing right now is very difficult, where we've entered into a very difficult, confusing, upsetting, terrified, perhaps devastating cultural moment, social moment. And it's not just particular to the U.S., although it's pretty awful there. So I really think that this draining out I don't need an escape. In other words, I've had people, just anecdotally, I was talking with somebody who I respect a lot, and we were talking, she works with a lot of gestural painters, and I said, well, she said, maybe people are interested because they would like to kind of leave this kind of corporeal world and enter into a world of pleasure and maybe perhaps escape. And I said, well, I'm not interested in that. Yeah. So I'm kind of doing the opposite. I think it's the thud that I'm interested in rather than the lightness. No. Yeah.
You know what? That really relates to something that you were saying before. The idea of this mark is put through so many translations, and I wonder if this distancing from the mark is also a kind of form of mediation, and that is a much slower and more circuitous way of dealing with contemporaneity or the present than the one that I feel like is really in demand from artists today, which is to kind of represent like a raw, unmediated reality. And that and that this more formal approach is one that is, I would say, not as prominent.
No, I would agree. I would agree with that very much. Not prominent. I've never addressed this before in terms of how. I have an algorithm. Let me go to this. Some of you who I know maybe know this, but when I was in Rome for a year, not too long ago, I really missed looking at contemporary art. There was not a lot of contemporary art in Rome in that year. Some, but and I generally when I go around in New York and look at shows, I want to see something terrific, but I'm often disappointed. But I thought, why do I miss it so much if I'm kind of disappointed? So I had to kind of come up with, well, what's important about work to me? How does something deliver to me? And I thought, well, I need two things. I need to think, and I need to learn something, and I need to feel something. So if those two things don't balance out, then it's lacking for me. And so I'm not saying that I live up to that. I'd like to, but I think the idea of mediation, mediating that mark, and the general kind of implications of that gesture, that mark, are something that I very much was thinking about post-algorithm in the work I've done since. Yeah, if that makes any sense, Justin.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Well, I was thinking when we saw the new works, there is a body of work you did around 2010, I think, 10, 11, the estate of Rochelle F. And so this was a body of work Rochelle did, which was the estate. So basically an artist living now is assembling her estate as if she was no longer there and kind of asking the question, what remains behind? I think this also had to do with the 2008 financial crisis. Everybody had to scale down, less space, consolidating materials, but also this is something where you had pre-existing stuff. So material you had collected on travels or things that caught your eyes, but also some pre-existing works by yourself, which like got a second life in this estate.
Yeah.
And so here in the exhibition, partly on those cards, there is the works from the series Memory Hole.
Yeah.
And so these are dated 2003 to 2024, or 2003 and 2024. And so there too, there are materials that you have kept and incorporated. And so maybe we can talk about this. Okay, why did you keep them? How did you end up using them? And also this would be a good point to get into some of your more deeply into your printmaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're distributed around on the cards. They're called memory holes. The work started initially, I've always played with print. I started out as a printmaker. So, and I've been very involved in it my entire life, but the printmaking is not necessarily limited to kind of lithography, etching, silkscreen, woodcut, but in general, as the media has grown, as digital media, I kind of just dip in whenever. I've done a lot of work digitally, but always combined with painting, not necessarily by itself. But the memory hole started with that early experiment. I was invited to make some prints on canvas in 2003 at ULAE by Bill Goldston. And so I had shopping bags from Rome that had patterns. I like things that pre-exist. A gesture pre-exists. The pattern on a shopping bag pre-exists, and then I can work with it to make something happen. So Bill printed all these UV prints on canvas, stretched them, had them delivered. And I thought, I don't know what to do with them. They were so strongly, of this kind of little patterns that were already established. It was very difficult for me to kind of enter into it. So when I carried them around 4 different studios in the last 20 some odd years, always thinking I'm going to work with them. And when I did hear, this is how language enters into my crazy brain, I did hear a discussion about a memory hole which exists. And it's, and so if you notice how the kind of additive materials here work, the memory is that piece that I couldn't work anything on, the original UV print, and so I've covered it over with a new memory. So essentially, it's like if something is unpleasant, you don't, what we were saying earlier today, you don't repress it, you don't sublimate it. It's like, no, you don't like it? Okay, let's create something new. And it's very much what's going on politically in my country. And so all these incredible lies that are told over something that might be the truth. So I started working with the silk screens and cutting them up and creating new memory holes. So working from that memory of something that I didn't want to work with and kind of turning it into something which became a painting, which is really important to me. So.
I thought it was interesting that you connected the memory hole to the estate, because for me, both of those projects are projects where you're showing that you are concealing something, or so it's kind of like a teeter-totter, or like a seesaw between like affirming, yeah, I did that thing, but also like disavowing it and trying to take distance from the thing that you did. And that is, I think I also share that with lots of my works, because I had a series of sculptures that were titled like, that part of my life is over, part 1, and then part 2 and part 3, So I can't quite relate to this idea of consigning things to the memory hole.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, or to the estate. It's done now.
Right. I do remember those works. It's something, is that about like your problem with debt?
Yeah, sure, right. I consign all my debts to the memory hole.
Exactly, yeah. That's what you did, literally.
But also maybe, because you guys talked already about gesture, but I think when we first started really talking, and years ago, I remember being like, she's really mad at gesture. Okay, I need to understand this. And I think in many of those works, of course, also in the memory holes, there's like a gestural element. So you have the scan sometimes of this plastic bag, and then there is like something glued on top, and this looks more like almost like when someone's trying out a pen or something in a store.
Yeah.
But it is also sometimes more lyrical in the gesture that you use. But there again, we have this, I wrote down today, gesture on laminate. I mean, it's like laminated gesture.
Laminate,
yeah.
That's...
Because it's kind of like, it's not even canvas anymore. It's sometimes really this scan of a canvas with a gesture on it. So we have like many degrees of removal, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. Right, exactly. The laminated, well, like the golden moments are all laminated. These mobile things are actually laminated. I mean, so that lamination becomes literal at some point.
Yeah, because I don't quite know what the material is, the trauma bodies. So you have like some elements repeating in this diptych, of course, and they come up in the canvas and then again in several scans, but that material is different than the one on the canvas, right? Because,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what is that in the trauma bodies?
The material?
Yeah.
They're all digitally printed. They're not silk screened.
Yeah.
So it's printed on a polyester.
Exactly.
It's a synthetic. Yeah.
That's what I called. It looked like laminate. So
that's they have a sheen. There's something to it. Yeah.
And I thought I had a certain perversion to it to do it that way.
Well, each of the rows relate to. I mean, I took a section of a larger screen, which is rather large. I mean, the original form of the silk screens are pretty larger than any of the individual scales here. So I then took a section out of the larger piece and then kind of sized it to the square, a rectangle, and a landscape. So those are the three forms, I mean, basically. So I'm always saved by form. If I don't know what to do, I figure out the form. So yes, they're not there, and then they're just pinned up. So they can be adjusted, however, but this is the way I like them. So each one relates to something in that row, and each of the additive elements of the Kozo papers, which are the color papers, they all kind of match up with the one gesture below. They're kind of like healing, patching, something like that.
I think I just understood now that maybe there is some relation between the embedded piece and the laminated Polaroids. Is there for you with that?
Yeah, well, I think so. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think this sealing, because the Polaroid started with the Polaroid names for their films, Golden Moments, Silver Linings, so the kind of packaging of experience, as are the color ones that are about summertime or surfing. It's really nonsense, but I talked to somebody else, and it was about like, Apple will say you have one new memory, and they frame your photographs in terms of what a memory is. And so I think that I laminated them, and the embedded piece is definitely deeply embedded in resin. And I think it's to really pickle them in this way. Because a Polaroid, you don't have to laminate it at all. And I didn't do it for conservation purposes. I just felt that I had to go through this press. It had to be, it's almost like the lamination is like a print as you kind of run it through the machine. So
maybe about the pieces we were just referring to, there's one piece on the floor over there that's a drop cloth that's dyed and in resin, and then other drop cloth pieces here, and then there are the Polaroids here on the strings. And today you talked about the embedded piece, the floor piece, and you said something that I thought was quite typical for your sense of humor about why you thought you had to embed that drop cloth. Can you maybe talk about that again?
Can you tell me what I said?
It was much better when it came from you. But you said, well, it's a drop cloth and it's like something that's like consumed by everyone. And also I like how it's
Yeah, so the
transport.
material itself, not necessarily the embedding process. Well, actually, I was working on it's almost like a decade-long project on Amazon. Amazon, not the Amazon, but Amazon the monster. And so I'd gotten a very cheap drop cloth for a studio in Rome, and I realized that it was better to paint on it than use it on the floor. And so that started my relationship with this fabric, which is not in the sense of the kind of in the art sense. It's not a kind of wouldn't be considered part of a textile exhibition or a weaving one or something related to the artisanal craft, jacquard loom, which a lot of artists are using now for hangings, fabric hangings. But what appealed to me was in the pieces on these two sides and in all the dawns and in the other pieces which are not here, which are ongoing, is the kind of the cheapness of it, the cheapness of this the consumer item that comes with Amazon. And I looked for the cheapest one, and because it presents a challenge in holding paint. It's like that kind of weave, which is so terrible that paint goes right through it. So and so I really began to work with it because it comes folded. It comes in a small package, and the folds become part of the grid piece. So there are grids all over here. And so the folds that are in the fabric pieces are deliberately left there as a kind of template for the work.
But then she also said, it's so nice because it's just like you can just fold it together and it's really small and you can take it everywhere. But then I thought, well, maybe I just embed it in this huge thing of resin, and then it's not portable at all anymore. And I thought that is like kind of a process or like a sense of humor that you often have in your method also, where you make something incredibly impractical for yourself.
Yes. Well, actually, because I wanted it to be on the ground, because I should point out that all the work in here is based upon 7 colors in the rainbow, so that it's staged to Richard of York gave battle in, that's blue and indigo, vein. So that, and I've been working with that very restricted palette in many different ways for the last couple of years. So the embedded piece that's on the ground really comes out of this kind of rainbow mush, the mush of the rainbow, yeah.
And I remember this morning you said that you wanted to lay it to rest.
Yeah.
And that you said you put it on the floor because it would somehow be like a tomb in some way.
Yeah, to encrypt it, yeah.
And then I was thinking about that, and one thing that is interesting about that is that there's only a few things that I think are entombed in such a visible way. Mm-hmm. It's not, usually you don't see the thing that is entombed, but like Lenin and Mao were entombed in such a way where you could still go visit them.
And there were a few different Maos too.
Yeah. So like, I think that there's a kind of, I don't know, there's something interesting to me about this idea that the thing is going to be, like, what does it take to set something aside, but still be able to return to it, you know?
I think that in traditional burials, I mean, whether it's in a church, cathedral, or plein air. Saints are entombed. Oh, yes. Yeah, they are. Well, that's not a saint, but that's a rainbow. And that it's really, kind of, it's laid to rest. I'm just over the aspirational aspects and hope of a rainbow. Let's call it my cynicism, but yeah.
Maybe one question of more general nature is that you also said in the past in an interview that working figuratively was never an option for you. And back then you said an object elicits zero empathy. It's not sentient. It's more of an obstacle to feeling. And I think this yeah, this was interesting how you put that. So also, do you want to say something about this? Like why was it never an option to, yeah, we don't want to make up this whole can of worms of like whatever figuration and abstraction. We're not going to go there, but the statement was...
It's kind of simple. I mean,
Yeah.
and it really, it comes from a desire and experience that I've had, and I don't want to be told what I'm supposed to feel. I don't. And I remember as a child going to the Museum of Modern Art. It was 2 floors, and growing up in New York, it was just like a great refuge. It was free, and the staircase still exists, which is it kind of winds around. If anybody here is old enough to remember that, yeah. And at the top of the staircase was the Guernica. And it was kind of amazing. But in any event, there was a Siqueiros painting there, and it was, and I think I was probably 12 or 13 years old. This is the only moment I'm going to go kind of autobiographical. It's relevant, I think. And it's a painting that I'm sure Tom knows it well, the Siqueiros, and it's a child, an African child, starving, screaming with a huge, usually enlarged, kind of 3 times the size of a human head, and all this kind of death and destruction around it. And I remember feeling, this is just too much. It's real. I don't need to be told by a painting what I'm going to feel about it. This is in the world. I know about that. Don't tell me what I know. So it was a very strong reaction, and I think that stayed with me. And I don't like to be coerced into feeling when I think that feeling can emerge in different ways.
I like that. It reminds me of something that I have actually never seen this show, but in a book I read, the author was speaking about a show called Fleabag. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
You have seen it?
The program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so she really liked this show, but she said that the protagonist of the show was always talking to the camera in the show, but that this had the opposite effect of Brechtian alienation, because when the characters speak to the audience in Brecht's plays, they do it so that the audience can have some critical distance, to create another layer of mediation, so that the audience can distance themselves from the drama. But that in Fleabag, the protagonist speaks to the camera in order to create more and more intimacy, so that you no longer have the critical distance. And maybe there is something going on like that in the Siqueiros painting that is not happening in your painting.
It's not. No. Yeah. It is, but it is speaking directly to the thing or directly to the viewer. So I think the thing, to me, speaks from the inside out, from the outside in, maybe. That it's the opposite.
Yeah.
If that.
Okay.
Interesting reference. Yeah.
I'll give you the book. It's
Yeah.
good.
No. Yeah.
Maybe that could also be a segue into the Red Dawn paintings. So first of all, maybe they have like some sort of more folksy vibe, maybe. So they are hanging there. They are kind of have something of a shroud, but then they also have the more tie-dye kind of reference in them, and then of course the reference to the 2 films, Red Dawn from Maybe you wanna, I think this is also a good example of you having these very specific references in your work and then yet not really giving it away. Maybe.
Yeah, there are other pieces I've done on this cloth, this size, that come from, that are not the Red Dawns, but I think of them as American samplers, that they're kind of representative of morality or somehow instructional, and so I thought of them initially as samplers because I do add my funky sewing to them. But the Red Dawns are two films, and the first one, John Milius, was in 1984. The remake was in 2012. And they really are about kind of the Americans' fear of invasion, at first by Nicaragua and Russia. It was taken over, and this football team goes to the hills and they form a militia, and they're fighting for the return of democracy valiantly. and very beautifully. I mean, they're gorgeous young people. So they never really, the mountains didn't affect them at all. So, and the second one, the invading force was, they were North Koreans. And again, this theme of teenagers goes to fight for democracy. And so I thought at the moment I started making those that there really is a rise of militias. I think there's a romance about guns and democracy and so on. I don't want to get too deeply into that because time, for one thing right now, but also there's a lot to say about it. But the most recent film, which Damien, he's here somewhere, says he's lost 2 hours of his life looking at Civil War, which is a 2023 film, which is really about where we are now, pretty much, which is there's an American government that is a very populist government that has, and very conservative, very right-wing, has taken over the country, the governance, and there are forces that are fighting for democracy to gain democracy back. And I should just point out that in the States in 2020, the United States was removed from the list of countries that had democracy, and it turned into an anocracy. So we've been in that state for a very long time, where there were some rights, but then they're being eroded constantly. So this, you have democracy, and then you have things that are not quite. So the Red Dawns are, for me, markers, they're chronicles. All of my work is really a kind of a chronicle of the time of my lifespan, essentially, and these times. Not my life particularly. So they become that part of that chronicle.
I think I got the sign. We have like one more question maybe, and I saw you had in your notes, you had like this. This do you want?
Yeah. Well, okay, this is kind of more of a formal or even a process question.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But it occurred to me that your work, although actually now it's kind of not true with the sampler thing, because that's a very handmade process, but that a lot of your work is using industrial processes that are kind of just out of date. So like silk screen, now if you had a silk screen t-shirt, that would be a fancy t-shirt. Mm-hmm. Or even lamination is something that you don't really see so frequently anymore. And that that using these artisanal these processes that were industrial and now have been rendered artisanal is maybe something that has to do with time in your work.
I think it does. I hadn't framed it that way, but I think it does. And in the silkscreen also, because these silkscreens are they're used by many artists. Silkscreens are in various ways. For this particular work, I used a halftone, and I made the halftone visible, because I wanted to be clear that in terms of time, that you don't really see too much halftone printing now. You see everything is pixelated. So I really wanted to go back to another time with the halftone and to make sure that it's clear that these are reproduced, that they're not, just a high contrast and seamless, that they kind of stammer their way through, and they're flattened out. And the composition paper shows, which is really talking about how you learn, at least for us, you learn how to print, to write on lined paper with 3 holes, and you're following the script. Yeah. So it goes back to that time. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Okay.
No.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we got the time is over. Congratulations, Rochelle.
Oh God, thank you.
Stop.